Hello and a warm welcome. You joined us on Market Cafe this Tuesday morning. I'm Ashesha Advaryu. With me is Kanishka Sarkar joining us from our Delhi studio. But the big story this morning, US President Donald Trump has escalated trade tensions with India, vowing to substantially raise tariffs. In a very truth social post, Trump accused India of profiting off Russian oil while ignoring the Ukraine war toll. This comes days after he slapped a 25% tariff, citing India's high duties and Russian deals. The latest salvo links trade penalties to India's ties with Moscow. Let's in fact go across first and listen in to what US President Donald Trump had to say on the sanctions against Russia.
Well, there'll be sanctions, but they seem to be pretty good at avoiding sanctions. You know, they're wily characters, and they're pretty good at avoiding sanctions. So we'll see what happens. But Steve is focused right now on the border in terms of, we're talking about with Gaza, getting people fed. And he may be going, I think next week, Wednesday or Thursday, may be going to Russia. They would like to see him. They've asked that he meet, so we'll see what happens.
Those are the latest comments coming from President Donald Trump. But India has hit back at criticism from the US and EU over Russian oil imports, calling it unjustified and unreasonable. Now, in a strongly worded statement, the MEA has said that India turned Russian crude only after traditional suppliers were redirected to Europe, which was a move the US initially encouraged. Now, the statement points out that Western nations themselves continue to deep trade with Russia from LNG to uranium, making their criticism hypocritical. Now, my colleague Sumita Karir has been tracking all the developments very closely. Let's go across to her and understand what India's response really means. The most stern response coming from India so far, Sumita?
Well, India has pushed back against Donald Trump's threat to substantially raise tariffs on India over its continued oil imports from Russia, calling it the targeting of India as unjustified and unreasonable. In fact, India began importing from Russia due to diversion of traditional supplies to Europe is essentially what India also mentions in that statement. It also states that US actively encouraged that for global energy market stability. Now, in this strongly worded and sharply worded statement, the Ministry of External Affairs has defended India's energy strategy. It said that crude oil purchases from Russia are a necessity that's compelled by global market conditions and are not a political endorsement of Moscow. Now, this response from India came hours after Donald Trump accused India of buying massive amounts of Russian oil and selling it in the open markets for big profit. He also vowed to penalize New Delhi by raising tariffs, which already stand at a 25% duty. Now, Trump's rhetoric, remember, has escalated over the past 1 week, especially when it comes to India's oil trade with Russia, perhaps as a ploy to put more pressure on New Delhi to agree to its terms and conditions with respect to a trade deal. Now, the MEA also pointed out United States and European Union's double standards. It mentions in the statement that the bilateral trade of European Union reached 67.5 billion euros with Russia in 2024. The imports of LNG as well reached record highs, and US meanwhile continues to import from Russia the requirements for its nuclear industry, for chemicals, and for its EV industry.
Much for joining us with all those details. But Brigadier Vinod Dutta, Kargil war veteran and former Deputy Assistant Chief IDS, speaks about Trump's policies with regard to India, and he also believes that India will continue to prioritize its own interests. Let's go across and listen into what he had to say.
Donald Trump has been giving statements which are not mature enough, and by no stretch of imagination they give any semblance to any statesmanship or a political leader of his stature. So India has also been following a policy of wait and watch. Though India has increased its intake of oil from USA, and USA substantially controls a lot of oil across the world. But India, by no stretch of imagination, will going to follow the mandate of USA. India is going to take a decision which is in the best interest of the nation. And India is also not going to, sever its relations with Russia. Because if you go back in history, you will find that America is not a very, dependable ally.
All right, so that's the latest expert view we are getting on US-India trade tensions. But moving on, let's also listen to what Prime Minister Narendra Modi had to say on the adverse impact from tensions in West Asia and Europe.
पश्चिम एशिया और यूरोप में चल रहे कॉन्फ्लिक्ट को लेकर हम दोनों ने चिंता व्यक्त की है। इनका नकारात्मक प्रभाव केवल उस क्षेत्र तक सीमित नहीं है। हम दोनों मानते हैं कि यह युद्ध का युग नहीं है।
All right, so that's the latest comments that we're tracking from Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But let's also